Among the multiple segments on Animaniacs, the one that came from a source that would likely be most unknown to the children tuning in was the Goodfeathers. Centering on three New York pigeons, it was a parody of the Martin Scorsese movie Goodfellas. As someone who was far too young to watch that movie and did not pay attention to gangster films when I first saw Animaniacs, that reference obviously went over my head. Nonetheless, I enjoyed those characters and still find them to be amusing. Part of that is because pigeons are naturally funny birds. Really, have you ever seen pigeons in the way they walk? Plus, with the way they are often together and usually prowling around dirty city areas looking for food scraps, it makes sense why they would be perfectly suited for a cartoon. So taking pigeons and giving them characteristics inspired by the stars of Goodfellas was a particularly inspired idea on the part of the writers. Steven Spielberg has said that Goodfellas is his favorite Scorsese movie, so I imagine he chuckled himself when he was first presented with the concept and designs. The principal writer on the Goodfeathers segments was Deanna Oliver, who's also the creator of Chicken Boo, so she seemed to have a particular skill at writing comedy for cartoon birds. The lead pigeon is Squid, who is based off Ray Liotta, with Maurice LaMarche doing a perfect impression of him. Like Henry Hill in Goodfellas, he longs to become a part of the gang, with him often narrating that he wanted to be one as far back as he can remember. Although unlike Henry, Squid is a kind pigeon with no interest in violence. Pesto is based off Joe Pesci's portrayal of Tommy with a short fuse ready to burst and taking offense at any little comment made by Squid. He shares the most in common with his film counterpart, so probably not a good idea to ask him to go home and get his shine box. He was voiced by Chick Venera, who absolutely nailed the fiery personality of many a Pesci character. Finally, there's Bobby, modeled after Robert De Niro. He's basically the brains of the group, though also with a penchant for getting into trouble and being harmed in certain ways. Put all three of them together, and you get a pretty funny trio. Though again, it's wild that the Animaniacs team looked at this R-rated, violent gangster movie full of swear words and decided to make a cartoon segment out of it. I mean, think about it. Squid is based on a movie character who's himself based on a real-life person. And Henry Hill was still around and doing who knows what criminal activities at the time. So there is a possibility he caught an episode on television while channel surfing. So I cannot help but wonder what he thought of seeing an animated pigeon parodying his movie persona. As for the segment plots themselves, a lot of them involve spoofs of other movies. One is inspired by West Side Story, involving a conflict between the pigeons and sparrows and Squid falling in love. The show's songwriters even made some tunes that perfectly capture the feel of the Bernstein-Sondheim songs from the original stage musical. Of course, Spielberg will later direct his own adaptation, so I wonder if he ever had this segment at the back of his mind when making that movie. There's a segment where the Goodfeathers work on the set of Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, complete with a parody of the famous director. There's also one based on Scorsese's Raging Bull, with Bobby naturally in the Jake LaMotta role, but this segment also throws in references to Rocky for good measure. And then another segment parodied Fiddler on the Roof. As is the norm for Animaniacs, there are references to actual filmmaking talent, and the most notable comes from the Goodfeathers' favorite spot being a statue of Martin Scorsese. Francis Ford Coppola is also name-dropped. The Goodfeathers would also answer to the God Pigeon, who is a parody of Don Vito Corleone from The Godfather. They got a lot of mileage out of his dialogue only being understood by Bobby, and the reverence the pigeons have for him. However, the segments did not just rely on movie parodies for their stories. There's an episode where Squid gets a serious case of the hiccups and how that affects all three of them. In another, they are given the responsibility of taking care of an egg, which leads to all sorts of comical complications. A common element of the segments came from how often the Goodfeathers would be harmed in typical cartoon fashion, whether because of the dangers of the city, like people trampling over them, or other shenanigans. The Goodfeathers occasionally have stories with their girlfriends known as the Girlfeathers. Kiersey, Squid's girlfriend, is Pesto's sister, rather than a parody of Lorraine Bracco from Goodfellas. There's a humorous dynamic there between the two, and the Girlfeathers prove to be smart when dealing with the boy pigeons. Spielberg did show these segments to Martin Scorsese, who enjoyed them. With that endorsement, it's almost surprising he was not brought in to do a guest voice, either as himself or as a pigeon. I mean, Shark Tale managed to get him to voice a pufferfish, so getting him on Animaniacs probably would not have been too out of the question. Then again, the show often utilized impersonators for their celebrity parodies rather than bring in the real deal. They could have done an episode where the Goodfeathers wind up on the set of a Scorsese movie that's filming in New York and find even themselves shocked at the amount of profanity being said and the violence being simulated. In an episode where the Warner siblings decide to switch up the cartoon pairings, we get a segment where Pesto and Runt the dog appear together. There's a lot of humor out of Pesto's temperamental personality clashing with Runt, and his annoyance at Runt wanting him to sing like his usual co-star Rita. Like a lot of the secondary characters, the Goodfeathers will mostly be relegated to cameo appearances at a certain point. While they had a decent number of cartoons during the show's first 2 seasons, these would dwindle down. After the episode, Bad Mood Bobby, the Goodfeathers would not star in a new cartoon for another 2 years with Boyd's on the Hood. And then 2 years after that came their final cartoon, Birds on a Wire, which incidentally was also on the last episode of Animaniacs. They also appeared in the final Pinky the Brain episode, Star Warners, a parody of Star Wars where they were stormtroopers. Like a lot of the other characters, the Goodfeathers would have roles in the movie Wacko's Wish. In the story, they are disrespected by King Salazar to the point they decide to no longer follow his orders and head for the wishing star themselves. When Animaniacs returned for the recent revival, the Goodfeathers would join several other characters and only making minor appearances, most notably in Good Warner Hunting, where they are chased by Chicken Boo, and then in the end are part of a mob of characters getting revenge on him. The Goodfeathers would also appear in the background of the segment Warner Games, and a sketch of Pesto was shown in one of the Masterclass shorts hosted by The Brain. Again, I think the Goodfeathers are very funny characters, and there are more potential stories that could have been done with them. Like I said, even though several references to gangster movies flew over my head when I was younger, I still found them to be funny parts of Animaniacs, and I enjoyed the dynamic between Squid, Bobby, and Pesto. And when I eventually did watch Goodfellas many years later, that made these segments even funnier. It's an example of how the writers mostly put in what they thought would be funny on multiple levels, and if that child may not entirely get what is being parodied, it will eventually click when they look back on the characters years later. See you next time.